after watching the speech, I want you to tell me just how good I did. Because believe me, I did terrific. My warranting impeccable, my impacts flawless, my delivery incredible. In fact, there were no problems with the speech whatsoever. While it may have been nice to live in a world of overwhelmingly positive feedback, it was the first time I touched a stove that made me never touch it again. The first time I failed a math test to learn how to do better. And the first time I went 2 and 3 in Harvard's PF training that taught me to eventually become first speaker of another. It's because failure is the foundation for all successes. So proud to drive the school bus of learning on proposition. In the speech, I'll be going over framework and then 2 substantives. 4 points on framing. First, what is the overinflation of academic self-perception? It is where, regardless of a student's results, they are rewarded and praised. This looks like overwhelmingly positive feedback, but note it can also completely distort the learning process of failure by incorporating grade inflation. Secondly, how does this impact today's society? While inflation of academic self-perception has risen, it still disproportionately benefits wealthier students. For example, in the US, according to College Board, the average GPA in private schools has risen by 8% from 1998 to 2016, while only 0.6% in urban public schools. While Oppa's best world is one where, over time, low-income students eventually have access to this inflation of academic self-perception, it takes too much time while actively disenfranchising them in the status quo. Third, on stance, the proposition's world is one where the overinflation of academic self-perception doesn't exist. Instead, learning would be more fair, and grades would truly be evaluated and used to help students succeed. This can look like a scale grading system like in China, or a mastery-based education system. In the opposition's world, the overinflation of academic self-perception, which primarily occurs in more wealthier regions, introduces more subjectivity. Finally, the burden crystallizes as follows. Whichever side is best for the state of education, including the students within it, should win this debate. On to substantive 1. Closing the classroom of access. Overinflation of self-perception leads to greater disparities between underprivileged and wealthy students. Note the most crucial stakeholder. The purpose of education was to serve as stairways on a path to progress. It always did this by being accessible and operating under a meritocratic system. Opposition's world, however, inherently gave the wealthy an elevator while taking away the railings for the underprivileged. Uniquely on the opposition side, the usage of grade inflation does more harm to the underprivileged. How does the inflation of academic self-perception always instill less accessibility? Through mechanisms. Firstly, it inherently caters to the wealthy. The reason grade inflation originated was because of wealthy students enrolling in private schools that were designed to help them get into the best colleges. With the reputations of these schools at stake, having grade inflation or avoiding failing grades was the best way to ensure better acceptances. On a macro level, it looks like students coming from more socioeconomically privileged backgrounds looking better to college admissions because of their higher grades than lower income students, who work twice as hard. Especially internationally, where the concept of grade inflation is less, it means students from the global south having less of an ability to be accepted into colleges within the US. By supporting a side of inflation of academic self-perception, opposition supports decades of academic redlining. Second, it introduces more bias. Overinflation of academic self-perception is inherently inconsistent. There are several doubts that plague the mind under the opposition. How do teachers ensure that all students receive the same exact amount of encouragement? On a macro level, how will opposition ensure that all grading systems are the same? These are all questions we encourage opposition to answer in their next speech. But we know the answer, frankly, is that we can't answer it. On opposition's world, teachers resort to vastly different grading approaches. One teacher may weigh soft skills and attendance into grades, while another may consider student effort and achievement. These metrics are a loudspeaker for biased perceptions. This looks like how research has shown white teachers give black students lower scores than white students when judging student effort and participation. Thirdly, there's less credibility over time. At opposition's best, as more people began feeding into the inflation of academic self-perception, it ultimately disenfranchises the entire education system, even schools not feeding into the inflation. This looks like how TM Landry, a private school in Louisiana, which gained national attention for its viral acceptances of students into elite colleges. However, as it came to light that transcripts were falsified, the school closed in 2022. At the same time, more importance has been put back to more objective measures of identifying academic strength through the reinstatement of SAT and ACT by many Ivy schools. All of this goes to show less credibility within ops world. Opposition's world disenfranchises low-income students the most, ultimately gridlocking their own offense. The impact is twofold on the problem. First, students now have a consistent grading system that decreases the potential for bias. This means that students in India still have an opportunity to learn abroad because their GPA finally competes with that of their academic counterparts. Second, grading systems are no longer seen as not credible while reestablishing more metrics of ensuring students find academic success. Our second substantive is a U-turn on the school bus of education. The overinflation of academic self-perception leads to less willingness to participate in the learning environment. We will evaluate the substantive on 2 layers. the short term and the long term. Firstly, why is there less effort in the school system in the short term? Two stakeholders. First, on students, two mechanisms. One, it only fuels the addiction to academic validation. We told you from the beginning that too much academic validation is detrimental for students. It measures worth based on how much praise you receive rather than educating yourself. This, rather than leading to a greater desire to learn for the sake of learning, creates a hyper-competitive atmosphere where students crave validation. Second, it offers less incentive to learn. Two reasons why. One, if students will be praised and congratulated regardless of whether they understand their subject matter, they're less willing to come forward when questions do arise. Two, and more charitably, students no longer know what they need to study. If students overrate their own abilities because of constant positive feedback, they're less likely to know what they should improve on. When you overestimate how well you are doing, it is far harder to improve yourself. What are the implications of this? Students are unable to truly learn. They feel less incentive to correct bad habits in terms of studying because they're already doing good enough. Second, on teachers. Teachers put less effort into teaching. When teachers only have to give positive praise without identifying a student's shortcomings, the quality of their feedback is less likely to be individualized. On to the second layer. How does this affect the long term? First, note the strategic importance of the long term. We would always weigh on the long term since education serves as a means to an end. On to our two impacts. First, on a lack of preparedness. Failure is inevitable and what ultimately shapes a person. However, overinflation actively prevents students from understanding how failure is important. When a student becomes an adult and inevitably faces failure, they simply won't be able to face it. In fact, it may mean these adults only err on the safe side of things, avoiding failure together. In school, the beacon of learning and building your identity, the opportunity a student may have had to speak about what they don't know is now gone. Second, students are prevented from realizing what they actually love. It looks like the student that may have become a teacher because they realized they like teaching others is now becoming an engineer because they're getting good enough grades. When students don't know what they truly enjoy, they're more likely to do things society calls for. It is because Proposition always understood that there were a few bumps on the path of learning. Very proud to honk the bus of Proposition. Thank you.